Las Vegas was buzzing louder than usual that weekend. The annual Global Martial Arts Expo had taken over the Strip, a massive celebration where legends, students, and fans from around the world gathered under one roof. Posters of famous fighters filled the hallways, but two names towered above them all: Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal. Both were scheduled as keynote guests, and the crowd was electric at the idea of seeing two icons of action films and martial arts masters in the same place. Photographers swarmed every corner, hoping to catch a moment between them. Backstage, Chuck Norris was surrounded by reporters who asked him about the possible tension with Steven. Chuck laughed it off. "Steven's Aikido is so smooth," he joked. "Sometimes I can't tell if he's fighting or dancing." The reporters chuckled. Cameras flashed. Chuck smirked. It was harmless fun in his mind. But what he didn't know was that Steven Seagal was just a few steps away, standing behind the curtain, hearing every word. Steven didn't say anything. He simply narrowed his eyes, the kind of slow, deliberate stare that made grown men uncomfortable. He walked away quietly, giving no reaction, but the silence felt heavier than any punch. A production assistant ran to Chuck. Sir, Steven heard that." Chuck brushed it off. It was just humor. He knows that. But Steven didn't laugh that day. Out on the main stage, fans were chanting both names. Posters waved. Camera phones lifted. The expo organizers whispered nervously. The tension was spreading faster than wildfire. As Chuck headed toward the stage, he noticed people murmuring, glancing back and forth between him and Steven's dressing room. One fan whispered loudly, "Dude, did you hear?" Chuck roasted Steven backstage. Another replied, "Bro, Steven is not the type to let that slide." Chuck shrugged it off and stepped onto the stage, smiling, waving, radiating confidence. The crowd roared. But behind the stage curtain, Steven Seagal had already made a decision, one that would flip the entire expo upside down. What Steven did next would shock the whole arena. And Chuck Norris? He was about to step into something he never expected. The roar of the Las Vegas crowd echoed through the arena like a thunderstorm as Chuck Norris finished his segment on stage. He cracked a few more jokes, smiled confidently, and gave that classic thumbs-up fans loved so much. Cameras flashed, fans screamed his name, and everything seemed perfect. But backstage, a very different storm was brewing. Steven Seagal had entered the building. Word spread instantly, like the sound of a blade slicing through silence. "He's here. Steven just walked in. Oh man, this is about to get interesting." Steven's entrance was nothing dramatic. No music, no entourage, but the atmosphere changed the moment he stepped inside. Dressed in his signature long coat, dark sunglasses, and that calm, unreadable expression, he moved slowly through the hallway, hands folded, energy steady like a coiled spring. People whispered as he passed, "That's the guy Chuck joked about." Steven doesn't like jokes about Aikido. Is he mad? No idea, but he looked serious. Steven didn't say a word. Not a smile. Not a nod. Just that cold, unblinking stare straight ahead. Inside the main hall, the expo announcer hyped up the audience. "Las Vegas, are you ready for the legends together?" The crowd roared again. Chuck waved, still smiling, until he turned and saw Steven walking toward the curtain, preparing for his entrance. Their eyes met for half a second. Steven didn't blink. Chuck's smile faltered just a little. The announcer continued, "Please welcome Steven Seagal." The arena exploded with cheers. Steven walked out slowly, deliberately, the spotlight reflecting off his glasses. Chuck stepped aside, giving Steven room to stand center stage. But when the two legends stood only a few feet apart, you could feel the tension. Chuck extended his hand with a polite smile. Steven didn't take it. A low murmur rolled through the audience like a wave. Chuck whispered under his breath, "Come on, man, it was a joke." Steven tilted his head slightly, his voice calm but cutting. "A joke at someone else's discipline is not a joke, Chuck." Microphones caught the line. The audience gasped. Social media live streams blew up instantly. Fans leaned forward in their seats. Some grinned. Others bit their lips in nervous excitement. A few even chanted lightly, "Fight! Fight! Fight!" A producer rushed to the stage edge, signaling Chuck to keep it cool. Chuck stepped toward the mic. "Folks, Steven and I have known each other a long time. I was just teasing him earlier." Steven cut him off. "You mocked something you don't understand." The arena fell completely silent. Even Chuck's expression tightened. He wasn't used to being talked to like that. Not on stage. Not in front of thousands. "Look," Chuck said firmly but calmly. "I respect what you do." It was lighthearted. Nothing more. Steven folded his arms. "Then perhaps we should demonstrate our understanding in the ring." The audience erupted. Chuck blinked. "A demonstration?" Steven nodded slowly. "Unless you'd prefer to keep the jokes outside the mat. A challenge. A direct one." People screamed, stood up, recorded on every device they had. The energy hit the ceiling. Chuck knew exactly what was happening. Steven was calling him out in front of the whole world. And backing down wasn't an option. Not for Chuck. Not for his reputation. Not with millions watching. He forced a smile. "A friendly demonstration sounds good to me." Steven's lips curled into the smallest, coldest smile Chuck had ever seen. "Oh, it will be friendly," Steven said softly. "I promise." The audience had no idea what those words meant. But Chuck felt something shift. He didn't show fear, but inside, a small voice whispered. That wasn't a friendly promise. As organizers rushed to set up the demo ring, the crowd chanted louder and louder. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck! Seagal! 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 Let them spar! Let them spar!" Backstage, Chuck grabbed a bottle of water, breathing slowly. His heart wasn't racing from fear. It was racing from the sudden weight of the moment. Steven Seagal wasn't laughing. He wasn't joking. He wasn't playing. He wanted to prove something. And Chuck suddenly realized. He might have pushed the wrong man at the wrong place on the wrong day. But the arena was waiting. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. And there was no turning back. The arena lights dimmed slightly as organizers rushed to assemble the sparring area in the center of the expo hall. A circular mat, white and blue, was rolled out. Spotlights swung into place. Security created a perimeter as fans pushed forward, eager to witness something no one had expected when they bought their tickets. Chuck Norris versus Steven Seagal, a live, unscripted demonstration. Cameras zoomed, influencers went live, and martial arts students stood on their toes trying to get the best angle. The pressure was unbelievable. Backstage, Chuck rubbed his wrists, warming them up. He'd sparred thousands of times in his life. He'd fought opponents far younger and stronger. He'd trained with the best. He knew how to read energy, read movement, read danger. But this situation felt different. A stagehand whispered, "Mr. Norris, you don't have to do this." Chuck smiled slightly. "If I back out, the internet will roast me for the next 50 years. The stagehand showed sympathy in his eyes. "Yeah, but is pride worth it?" Chuck's smile faded. "It's not pride. It's about respect. I can't let the world think I'm afraid of a man I've known for decades." Meanwhile, just a few rooms away, Steven stood perfectly still while an assistant tied his belt. His calmness was eerie, unnerving. His breathing didn't change. His posture didn't shift. The assistant swallowed nervously. "Steven, just remember, they want a friendly demonstration." Steven put on his glasses slowly. "That depends on Chuck." The assistant didn't dare ask more. When Steven walked toward the ring, the crowd parted like waves around a ship. He didn't acknowledge anyone. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply walked with that cold, heavy presence, like a storm in a black coat. Chuck stepped out next, raising his hand to the cheering fans. But deep down, he could feel every eye watching, every camera recording, every martial artist analyzing. He couldn't afford to slip. He couldn't afford to look weak. Not today. A referee approached the two men at the edge of the mat. "This is a controlled demonstration," he reminded. Light contact. Respectful exchange. Are we clear? Chuck nodded. Crystal. Steven's response was a flat, quiet, "We'll see." The referee frowned. Sir, this must remain safe. Thousands are watching. Steven tilted his head. I understand. But his tone made the hairs on the back of Chuck's neck rise. The announcer's voice boomed across the arena. Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time ever, a live sparring demonstration between two martial arts legends, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal. The crowd went wild. People screamed. Phones lifted. Even celebrities in the VIP section leaned forward like fans. Chuck stepped onto the mat first. Steven followed. The referee signaled. Bow. Chuck bowed professionally. Steven bowed a fraction, barely dipping his head. They took positions. Chuck raised his hands in a classic guard stance. Loose gloves, light feet, relaxed shoulders. Steven didn't raise his hands at all. He stood with them at his sides, like a statue. The crowd murmured. What's he doing? Why isn't he ready? Is this some kind of trick? Chuck paused. You're not getting into stance. Steven's voice flowed like cold water. When you attack, I'll respond. Chuck's mouth tightened. So Steven wanted him to strike first. The arena leaned in. Chuck circled lightly, testing distance, testing energy. Steven didn't move an inch. Not a blink. Not a shift. Not a shuffle. Just stillness. It was unsettling. Chuck decided to break the ice with something soft, a light tap of a kick, nothing aggressive, just enough to set rhythm. He flicked a gentle front kick towards Steven's midsection. Steven's hand moved so fast most people didn't even see it. A smooth swipe, not forceful, not violent, but precise. He redirected Chuck's leg so efficiently that Chuck momentarily lost his balance. The crowd gasped. Chuck recovered, trying to hide the surprise in his eyes. Again, he circled. Again, Steven remained still. Chuck tried a light jab. Steven slipped it without turning his head, barely tilting an inch. The crowd buzzed. People whispered. The tension doubled. Chuck was starting to understand. Steven wasn't here for a friendly demonstration. He was here to make a point. So Chuck increased the pace, just a little. A combination, jab, low kick, feint, hook. Steven deflected the first two, ignored the feint completely, and barely moved out of range of the hook. The audience erupted. Oh my God, did you see that movement? He read him like a book. Chuck's chest tightened. He had not expected Steven to be this sharp, this cold, this focused. He exhaled slowly. All right then, he muttered. Let's see what you've really got. Steven raised his chin slightly. You're about to. A chill went through Chuck's spine. The demo was no longer a demo. It was a warning, a challenge, a message, and Chuck was right in the center of it. The next move would change everything. The air inside the Las Vegas training arena had turned heavy, thick enough to feel on the skin, like humidity made from tension and adrenaline. Chuck Norris paced lightly on his side of the mat, rolling his shoulders, breathing steady, eyes sharp. Steven Seagal stood across from him, calm and eerily still, like a statue carved from stone. Between them, the crowd of invited martial artists, trainers, and reporters leaned forward with identical anticipation. No one spoke anymore. Not after what happened in the last round. Chuck's light joke earlier, something he thought was harmless teasing, had clearly caught Steven off guard. And Steven's unexpectedly precise demonstration counter had caught Chuck off guard. Now both men stood in a strange, electric equilibrium where humor was gone, and only mutual respect and uncertainty remained. The referee stepped aside. The cameras rolled. The room collectively inhaled. Steven tightened the black belt around his waist and murmured, "Ready when you are." His voice wasn't threatening, just centered, grounded, absolute. Chuck admired that. As much as he'd never say it aloud, Steven Seagal carried an aura most fighters didn't. A presence, almost unsettling. Chuck inhaled slowly. Focus. No ego. Just flow. They stepped toward each other, but this time Chuck didn't attack first. Instead, He circled, measuring distance, watching Steven's feet, his shoulders, the tiny flicks of movement that reveal intent before the body commits. But Steven didn't move. He just watched him. Chuck felt something he rarely experienced, the sensation of being read like an open book. The spectators whispered, "Why isn't Chuck attacking? Is Seagal waiting for something? This is getting intense." The moment stretched until finally Chuck slid forward, launching a quick front kick. Not full power, just a probe. Steven didn't block it in the traditional sense. He glided out of the line of attack, barely shifting his stance, and placed his palm on Chuck's extended leg, guiding it down like someone lowering a fragile vase. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't showy. But it was controlling. Chuck adjusted immediately, snapping into a back fist. But Steven's wrist intercepted it mid-flight, redirecting it sideways with minimal motion, almost elegant. Chuck exhaled sharply. He's reading everything, he thought. For the first time in a long time, Chuck Norris felt challenged, not physically overwhelmed, but strategically cornered. Steven wasn't overpowering him. He was neutralizing him, step by step. Chuck narrowed his eyes, deciding it was time to raise the intensity. With a sudden burst, he pivoted, threw a spinning heel kick, not at full force, but fast enough to command respect. The crowd reacted instantly with gasps and murmurs. But Steven moved at the last fraction of a second, letting the kick pass harmlessly over his shoulder, like dodging a falling leaf. Before Chuck's land foot touched the ground, Steven's palm settled lightly on Chuck's back, not pushing, just letting him feel the position he was in. Chuck corrected his balance quickly, but his heart rate climbed. Steven stepped back, offering a small nod. "Good kick." Chuck almost smiled. Not good enough, apparently. The crowd laughed softly, relieved to hear a shred of humor return, but the tension didn't disappear. It only thinned. Then came the moment the entire arena would talk about for years. Chuck advanced with a complex flurry. Jab, low kick, feint, hook, knee. It was a veteran combination designed to keep an opponent guessing. Steven, however, moved with a calmness that bordered on unsettling. He deflected, sidestepped, absorbed angles, guiding Chuck's kinetic energy somewhere else, like Chuck was fighting air that had opinions. Finally, Chuck feinted a punch, then dropped low for a sweeping kick aimed at Steven's ankle. But Steven didn't fall for the feint. He didn't fall at all. Instead, he stepped precisely out of range, placed a hand on Chuck's shoulder, and used minimal leverage to stop Chuck's rotation, ending the entire sequence as if he were pressing the pause button on a movie. The crowd exploded with noise. "What?" He stopped Chuck mid-sweep. "No way. Did you see that control?" Chuck stepped back, chest rising with deeper breaths now. He looked at Steven with genuine surprise and respect. In that instant, their energy changed. The rivalry faded, replaced by the unspoken recognition only elite martial artists can share. "You're better than I expected, and I need to bring even more." Chuck wiped sweat from his brow. "Okay, Steven," he said, voice softer, humbled. "Looks like I underestimated you." Steven shrugged slightly. We all underestimate each other sometimes. The moment carried weight, far more than punches or throws. The audience felt it. Two legends meeting not as enemies, not as competitors, but as warriors acknowledging each other's truth. Chuck bowed lightly. Steven returned the bow. The entire crowd rose to their feet, applauding a moment more powerful than any knockout. The match wasn't over, but something inside Chuck had changed, and the next round would show the world exactly what that meant. The applause slowly faded, but the electricity in the room refused to disappear. It lingered like static on the skin, buzzing through the air as Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal returned to their corners. Chuck inhaled, closing his eyes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't embarrassed. He was awake. That brief exchange in the previous round had lit something inside him, a spark he hadn't felt in years. Steven's unshakable composure, his effortless deflections, the way he neutralized power without meeting power, It forced Chuck to dig deeper into the parts of himself that only activated when facing a truly worthy adversary. And Chuck loved that feeling. Across the mat, Steven Seagal adjusted his sleeves, expression unreadable. He wasn't gloating, wasn't smug, just calm, present, like a mountain waiting for the weather to settle. The referee raised his arm. Round 3 began. Chuck didn't hesitate. He launched forward with a sudden burst, a blur of controlled aggression. But this time, it wasn't a predictable attack. He mixed karate footwork with jiu-jitsu angles, unpredictably weaving in and out. His strikes weren't meant to land. They were meant to set traps, create openings, disrupt rhythm. Steven's eyes narrowed slightly, acknowledging the shift. Chuck swept low, jabbed high, feinted mid, then kicked toward the ribs. Steven blocked, but slid back 2 steps, absorbing the motion with surprisingly light footwork for a man his size. Chuck pressed forward, 1, 2, 3, for rapid strikes. Steven parried 3. The 4th skimmed his shoulder. The crowd roared. Steven gave a faint smirk. "You're waking up." Chuck breathed harder now. "You asked for it." What followed was a dance. Beautiful, technical, dangerous. The kind only martial artists truly understood. Chuck attacked with combinations that blended decades of experience. Steven countered with efficiency that seemed almost supernatural. Chuck's power met Steven's redirection. Steven's precision met Chuck's timing. Then came the moment things shifted again. Chuck faked a step to the left and spun suddenly, launching a back kick aimed with surgical precision. Steven moved, but not quite fast enough. For the first time, Chuck made clean contact, his heel touching Steven's side with a firm, audible thud. Not enough to hurt, but enough to balance the scoreboard. Steven stepped back, hand on his ribs for a brief second. The room fell silent. Not because the kick landed, but because Steven Seagal laughed. A deep, genuine, appreciative laugh. "Very good," he said. Chuck nodded, breathing hard. "I've still got a few tricks." Steven's smile faded, replaced by a glint of challenge. "So do I." Steven moved for the first real time since the match began. He stepped forward with purpose, generating momentum that shifted the entire room's energy. Suddenly, he was the one applying pressure. Chuck adjusted instantly, but Steven's approach wasn't wild or aggressive. It was measured, deliberate, like watching a tide roll in with unstoppable force. Steven slid inside Chuck's range and placed his hand lightly on Chuck's wrist. Everyone watching held their breath. Chuck knew what was coming. Aikido. Steven pivoted smoothly, guiding Chuck's arm downward while stepping through with perfect balance. Chuck moved with it to avoid being thrown, countering by looping his other arm towards Steven's neck, but Steven redirected that too, using minimal force. It wasn't a throw. It wasn't a strike. It was control. Absolute, gentle, undeniable control. Chuck regained his footing and stepped back, eyes intense. Sweat dripped down his temples. Steven returned to his stance like nothing happened. The crowd started chanting, "Let's go, Chuck! Seagal! Seagal! Seagal!" 2 legends. 2 philosophies. 2 worlds colliding in one ring. Chuck decided it was time. He'd tested Steven. He'd been tested in return. Now it was about heart. Chuck surged forward with renewed force, unleashing a level of precision that made the crowd gasp. Each strike was calculated, each kick honed from decades of discipline. Steven absorbed, redirected, guided, but now he was working harder, stepping faster, adjusting deeper. For the first time, both men were fully in the moment. And then, after a rapid exchange, Steven attempted a wrist control technique, one that would have taken most fighters down instantly. But Chuck twisted, flipped his grip, and swept Steven's hand away with a clever counter Steven didn't expect. Steven's eyes widened slightly. Chuck grinned. "Thought you had me there, didn't you?" Steven exhaled. "Almost." Their mutual respect erupted into something greater, a friendly but fierce determination. Chuck took a deeper stance. "One more round like this," he said. and people will talk about it for decades. Steven nodded. Let them talk. Chuck took a step forward. Steven matched it. Two fighters. Two masters. Two men proving, not dominance, but legacy. The bell rang. They froze. The round was over. The crowd jumped to their feet, applauding wildly, shouting, whistling, exploding with energy that shook the entire arena. Reporters scribbled. Cameras zoomed in. Trainers exchanged looks of disbelief. Chuck and Steven walked toward each other. Neither bowed immediately. They just stood there, breathing heavily, staring with fierce respect. Then Chuck extended his hand. Steven took it. The crowd erupted again. No words were spoken. None were needed. Because in that silent handshake, the world understood. This wasn't just a fight. This was history. The roar of the crowd still echoed in the arena as Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal broke their handshake and stepped into their corners. Trainers rushed in with towels and water bottles, talking fast, trying to give advice, but both men barely listened. They weren't thinking about strategy anymore. They weren't even thinking about winning. What existed now was something bigger, a test of spirit. The referee raised his hand again. Final round. The arena lights dimmed slightly, sharpening the spotlight around the mat. Cameras zoomed in so close you could see the sweat dripping from Chuck's jawline and the slow, steady rise of Steven's chest. Chuck rolled his neck. Steven pressed his palms together and exhaled deeply. The bell rang, and the world held its breath. The silence before the storm. Neither man moved at first. It was almost eerie, two legends standing still, reading each other's energy with the intuition only masters earn after decades of training. Chuck's fists hovered loosely near his chin. Steven's arms rested calmly at his sides, fingers relaxed, almost daring Chuck to initiate. Finally, Chuck broke the silence. Not with an attack, but with a sentence. "You know," he said, breathing evenly. "I never imagined you'd push me this far." Steven lifted one eyebrow. Likewise, the tension liquefied into something more dangerous, mutual determination. Chuck smirked. "Ready?" Steven nodded once. "Show me." The fight explodes. Chuck launched forward with a sudden burst, faster than before, sharper than any earlier round. A perfect front kick, followed by a spinning back fist, then a sweep. Steven dodged the kick, blocked the back fist, but the sweep caught him just enough to force him a half-step sideways. The crowd gasped. Chuck didn't let him reset. He moved with relentless pressure. Jab, jab, hook, knee. But Steven's defense tightened, his hands graceful but firm as he deflected each strike with minimal movement. Steven finally countered, one precise motion. A palm strike aimed at Chuck's chest. Chuck blocked it, but the sheer timing made the crowd erupt again. These guys are insane. I've never seen anything like this. This is a masterclass. Sweat flew as they exchanged movement after movement. Steven's Aikido technique threading between Chuck's karate power, Chuck's precision slicing through Steven's redirections. Every move sharpened the air. Every counter raised the stakes. Every moment felt like history unfolding. The shift. Suddenly, Steven made a rare mistake. He stepped slightly too far to the left, just 1 inch more than needed, and Chuck's instincts fired instantly. He whipped around, launching a spinning hook kick targeted towards Steven's shoulder. The impact was clean. Steven staggered back. The entire arena froze. Reporters leaned forward. Trainers covered their mouths. Even Chuck paused, not chasing the moment, giving Steven space to recover. Steven straightened slowly and smiled. "You've still got the thunder," he said, rubbing his shoulder lightly. Chuck exhaled, relieved and energized. "And you've still got the storm." The crowd cheered wildly, but the round wasn't over. Steven lifted his hands, ready again. Chuck nodded. They moved back toward each other. The moment that stunned the world. This time, Steven attacked first. He stepped in quickly, a rare burst of speed, and caught Chuck's wrist. In one fluid motion, he attempted a classic Aikido throw. Chuck rotated midair, landed on his feet, rolled forward, and sprang back up into stance. The arena exploded with noise. Steven paused. Even he didn't expect Chuck to land that smoothly. Chuck wiped sweat from his brow. Not today. Steven chuckled. Fair enough. They clashed again. Hands, elbows, feet, each exchange more intense than the last. Chuck landed a sharp body punch. Steven answered with a shoulder lock setup. Chuck slipped out and countered with a crescent kick. Steven avoided it by a hair. They were pushing each other into deeper waters, testing endurance, precision, and will. Breathing heavy now, both men stepped back at the same time, almost synchronously, like their bodies agreed to a brief, silent truce. Then, Steven's leg buckled. Just for a second. A flicker. A weakness no one expected. Chuck noticed instantly. The crowd saw it too. The arena gasped as Steven steadied himself, raising one hand to gesture. I'm okay. Chuck stepped forward, lowering his hands. You good? Steven nodded, but there was grit in his voice. Keep going. Chuck hesitated. Steven looked at him with fierce determination. Finish the round. Chuck stared at him for a moment, the respect in his eyes unmistakable. Then he nodded. They circled again, slower this time, controlled, both aware that Steven's right knee wasn't at full strength. Chuck attacked carefully, not to hurt, but to test Steven's movement. Steven responded with equal control, not stubborn pride, but honor. It was no longer a clash of power. It was a statement of heart. The end of the round. As Chuck moved in for one last exchange, Steven intercepted his wrist gently, guided it away, and placed his other palm over Chuck's fist. No throw, no strike, just a gesture of completion. The bell rang. The match was over. The entire arena erupted. Applause, whistles, shouts of admiration, emotion, respect. Trainers rushed in. Cameras flashed. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Chuck put a hand on Steven's shoulder. Steven gripped Chuck's forearm. They bowed to each other, deeply, and the world understood what this moment truly was. Not victory, not defeat, but legacy. Two legends, two warriors, two men proving that respect outlasts strength. The arena was still trembling with applause as Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal stepped off the mat. Their bodies were tired, their breaths heavy, but their spirits were elevated in a way that only true warriors could understand. Reporters swarmed instantly. Cameras flashed like lightning. Microphones stretched forward. Every voice in the room seemed to merge into one chaotic wave. Chuck, how did it feel? Steven, what happened with your knee? Was this the greatest martial arts exhibition ever seen? But instead of soaking in the attention, both men did something unexpected. Chuck lifted Steven's hand in the air. Steven lifted Chuck's. A double salute. The arena exploded again. People weren't cheering a winner. They were cheering an era. The internet erupts. By the time the two legends made it backstage, clips of the fight were already flooding social media. Fans posted slow-motion highlights. Martial artists analyzed footwork, and celebrities reacted in real time. One clip went unbelievably viral. Steven buckling for a brief second. Chuck stepping forward to check on him. Steven insisting, keep going. And Chuck respecting him deeply. That 15-second moment became the global symbol of honor in combat. Comments poured in. Respect is greater than ego. This is what real martial arts looks like. No trash talk. Just two legends giving everything. Some fans even called it the most respectful fight in martial arts history. The interview that melted hearts. After the crowd settled and the cameras were repositioned, the two men agreed to sit for a joint interview. Something no one expected. Chuck leaned back, still catching his breath. Steven sat calmly, hands folded on his lap. Their energy was peaceful now, a stark contrast to the intensity from minutes earlier. The interviewer asked gently, Chuck, what made this match so different? Chuck chuckled. Steven made me feel 20 years younger and 20 years older at the same time. The room laughed. Steven added, Chuck pushed me harder than anyone has in years. That's something you don't forget. Then came the question millions wanted answered. Was this fight personal? Steven and Chuck glanced at each other. Chuck shook his head. No, never personal. Steven nodded. It was respectful from the first moment to the last. Chuck added softly. And it reminded all of us what martial arts is supposed to be. A message to the world. Later, when both men finally got their phones back, they noticed something astonishing. Millions of people were sharing the event, posting reactions, quoting their moves, celebrating their sportsmanship. Chuck finally posted on his official page. Strength fades. Skill evolves. But respect is forever. Steven reposted it, adding, honor is the greatest technique. Those two sentences were screenshotted thousands of times. Memes were made, but positive ones. Clips of their handshakes spread across every platform, and fans across the world typed one word in the comments. Respect. Behind the scenes. When the lights eventually dimmed and most people went home, Chuck and Steven stayed behind in the nearly empty training hall. No cameras, no audience, just two men sitting on the mat where they had battled moments earlier. Chuck looked over. That knee okay? Steven nodded. Just a slight twist. Nothing serious. Chuck smirked. Good. Because I want a rematch someday. Steven raised an eyebrow. Friendly one. Chuck laughed. Always friendly. Steven extended his hand again. Chuck shook it firmly. There was no competition now. No pride. Only mutual admiration. They both knew something special had happened. Something neither fame nor medals could replicate. A meeting of worlds. A clash of philosophies. A moment of pure martial arts truth. The legacy. Over the next few days, martial arts academies around the world replayed the match. Not to show violence, not to show dominance, but to teach humility, control, and discipline. Instructors pointed to the handshake, the bow, the concern, the respect. Parents showed their kids. Coaches showed their students. Masters showed their disciples. Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal didn't just have a showdown. They created a lesson, a reminder, a legacy, that in a world full of ego, one thing stands taller than strength: honor.